Hi, I'm Lisa Gonzales, Chief Business Officer here in Mount Diablo Unified. And for those of you that may have missed the board meeting on March 9th, wanted to do a quick recap of this school year's second interim report. So to start with, school districts are required to do interim reports. They're check-ins at a specific date and time, and it gives the school district and the county office an idea as to where we are with our budget. So the second interim is our second check-in of the year. It's a snapshot in time of January 31st. So what we do is we have all of our departments and all of our school sites close their books for one day. We check in on all the expenses, and then we report those out to the public, as well as any changes that we've had in our budget. We're always required to do what's called a multi-year projection, which is the current school year plus 2 others, and it does require our school board to provide its approval. There are 3 types of certifications. Positive means you're doing really well. Qualified means that you won't meet all of your obligations for one of the 3 years. And negative means that for 2 or more years, you're not able to meet your financial obligations. So there are always a handful of things that I want to make sure that the public really understands about budgets. First of all, when we go through budget development, we start with information that comes from School Services of California, and they create this really nice 1-page dartboard. It's called the dartboard, and these are the numbers that school districts across the state plug into their budgets in order to start working for the next year. We also do the check-in with our first interim and second interim using the same thing. So there's 3 things that I'd like you to take a look at here. Each one of them has an arrow. The first one has to do with the planning COLA, or cost of living adjustment. It is estimated to be 5.33% for next year. And then you can see what happens in the out years there. So we build into our budget those increases in certain parts of our revenue. The second thing that we take a look at is CPI, the Consumer Price Index. That's something that we're watching really closely because, as we know, the prices of just about everything are going up right now, including fuel. It's estimated to be 3.69% for next year. The tea leaves are starting to tell us that may go up some. It is at 5.78% this year. And then the other 2 things that we take a look at are down where the other arrow is, and that's under the CalSTRS and CalPERS retirement plans that we have for all of our employees. You can see in the upcoming school year 22-23, you can see right about here, we've got some jumps. So we go from 16.92% or maybe 17% up to 19 and close to 23 up to 26. And so this does affect our budget. It does affect our costs. And these are some of the things that we take a look at. Some big changes since our adopted budget. Our adopted budget was back in June of last year. We had a 45-day revision that was in August of last year. But we are watching our average daily attendance. That's because with certain changes in COVID this year, we know in December, January, February, Omicron hit. We had many students and many staff members that were out. And so we really take a look at changes during the year. Independent study for the many students who have been on independent study, because we do get our funding if those packets or work completions and contracts are turned in. And then certainly labor unrest may affect the average daily attendance. The board did approve $10 million worth of ongoing staff reductions starting next year. So that's been factored in. The SELPA base, or the funding that we get per student across the entire district, went up by $105 per student. We've removed some big things from our adopted budget. The first one was about $12 million worth of deficit mitigation. We had a line item for deficit mitigation so that each year we could have a few $1,000,000 in order to cushion the blow of the fact that we're not going to be getting as much in future years as our enrollment has declined. So we removed that, and we removed both the 3rd and the 4th year of textbooks for students. That was so that we could provide more financial incentive or raises on the salary schedules for our staff. We recognize vacancy savings. So this means that in the first interim and the second interim, as we see that positions are vacant, what we do is we go in and we capture that savings and we put it back into the budget. And then what you're going to see in just a minute is our last best final offer to our bargaining groups has been put in here also. This is one of our ways to start sharing with the public the requirement for AB 1200. It's a law that we have to abide by that says that we have properly vetted any potential raises with the school communities and with the board. So we've put that information in here as well. Real quickly, these are many of our assumptions. What I'll do right now is I'll just pause for a second. You can always stop the video and take a look at these a little more, but these are the assumptions that we use in order to figure out where we think we're going to be for the rest of this year, the next year, and the following year. This is what we've done with this year's budget, because we know that we will be providing salary increases to our staff in this fiscal year. We created something called future employee compensation. So we took the cost of our last best final offer and we put it down in this assignment. So when we put it here, this is what you would see in the report that we just published for our second interim. But for the sake of really understanding how those costs play out over time, what we did is we placed it in other locations. So I'll show you that in just one second. But I want to explain the future employee compensation. Our last best final offer was 3% on schedule, which means every year, 3% off schedule or a one-time amount for this school year. The next school year is 2.5% on schedule. The following school year is 1.5% on schedule. The total for that would be approximately $48 million. But there are some contingency options. So if we receive more in revenue, for any reason, the state gives us more money, our enrollment goes up, our average daily attendance goes up, that would all affect the LCFF revenue. So what we've done is we've determined that if there's an increase of $3.5 million, our employees would get 1% on salary schedule, and the same sort of calculations for the next amount. So if that amount doubles, and it's 7 million, our employees would get 2%. If it's 10.5 million, our employees would get 3%. And so we would be passing that on with 3 specific contingency language components. And I want to make sure I explain these real quickly because there seems to be some confusion that we have the ability to change those numbers. The increases are based on contingency language that would show an increase in the average daily attendance. Where do we get that? We get that from teachers taking attendance every day. And there's a hyperlink in there that if you click on that hyperlink where it says CDE with the underline, it takes you to the exact location that explains how average daily attendance is calculated. The same thing goes for an increase in unduplicated pupil count. We determine who unduplicated pupils are based on information that parents give us about their students. So if they're English learners, if their income is low, if they're homeless or foster youth, that's how those numbers are determined. And it is determined by calculations with the state of California, and it is part of our attendance system. The final one has to do with the cost of living adjustment. We call that COLA. The state of California identifies what the COLA is. As a matter of fact, it comes from the Department of Finance and it gets put into the school services resources and the dartboard that I explained before. So if you click on that hyperlink, you can see exactly where that comes from. So none of these are arbitrary calculations that anyone in our district can manipulate in any way. These are calculations that come straight through information that is provided from school sites, from parents, and from the state of California. The last thing I want to explain before we get into our second interim is really the difference between unrestricted and restricted funds. I've done some videos on this topic. I'm hoping that you'll go ahead and take a look at those, but I want to quickly explain unrestricted, the blue side that you see there. Unrestricted funds have very, very little strings attached. So you have flexibility as a district to be able to decide how you're going to use those. as opposed to many of the green ones that you see there, the restricted side, special education funding, state and federal funds, contributions from unrestricted, COVID funds, all of those have strings attached. They come from sources that say you can only spend it for this, and you're audited based on only spending it for whatever this is. So want to make sure that we clearly understand that, because we have to delineate between restricted and unrestricted, because we can't use restricted dollars for unrestricted purposes. We don't get to choose how we spend it. So in the current year's budget, we are expecting $298 million from unrestricted funds, 123 million from restricted funds. But it's also important to note that part of what we have to cover in restricted funds and restricted programs has to be backfilled from unrestricted. Why is that? Because we have certain budgets like transportation, sometimes food and nutrition, special education, where no matter how much we get from the state and the federal government, it's never going to cover the cost of those programs. So I can't take other federal funds, I can't take COVID funds and cover, let's say, special education. I have to go to something that is unrestricted, and I have to move that over. So now that we've explained that, let's go back to the future employee compensation that we put in our second interim report. So again, you see it there on the bottom. You see that we put funds in every single year to be able to cover that raise. But then what we do, for the sake of explaining it, we've actually taken those expenses and we've moved them up to the top of our MYP. We did that because we know how much those costs are for our certificated salaries, our classified salaries, and our employee benefits. So all we did was take the numbers from the bottom, factor them into the top, and then we can start looking at the 5 things that I continue to try to remind everybody to look at in a budget. The first one has to do with the revenue trends. For each of the years, I've put an arrow next to it. The revenue trends show that all of the money we are expecting to bring into the district, it would be 422 million this year, a drop to 386 million the following year, and then a bit of an increase to 389 million. Why the increase when we are declining enrollment? Because we know that we're going to be getting a cost of living adjustment, and so it starts to offset. That's the first thing you look at. The second thing that you look at in an MYP is you want to look at the expenditure trends. What's happening with the money that you think you're going to spend for the people and the products and the services that you have estimated. So what it shows right now is approximately 432 million worth of spending this year, 414 next year, and 404 the following year. Then we look at our over under trend. That means, how is the spending working with the money that we have coming in? So what you see is each of those arrows, once we've covered for our last best final offer, you do see a structural deficit or a deficit spending. Why is that? Because each one of those 3 years, we would be spending more than we are taking in. So this year, it would be approximately 9.6 million more that we would spend. Next year, it would be 27 million. The following year, it would be 15 million. The other thing, and the reason I started a little earlier by explaining the difference between restricted and unrestricted, is because, again, we can't use that restricted money for anything we want. The flexibility that we have is over on the unrestricted side. So what we want to do is we want to take a look at the net increase decrease. In this case, it is a decreasing trend. And we see that next year we are spending 5 million more, and then 20 million more, and then 16 million more in the unrestricted side of our budget. The last thing we take a look at is the ending fund balance trend. Right? So right here, you may see a number of 89 million, but we don't have 89 million that we can spend. We start by looking at the 66 million, but then we have to subtract all of these things here. And after we expend and spend all of these items here, it shows what we have left over, right? So what we look at here is we look at the 66 million in ending fund balance, we see a 60 million, and then we see a 39 million. What does that mean? It means that our balance that we have to roll to the next year, every year it is decreasing, and it really decreases pretty significantly between the 22-23 school year and the 23-24 school year. Where are we in the budget cycle? We just did our second interim report. We're waiting now for the governor's May revisions. After the May revisions, there will be another dartboard update that gives us an opportunity to check in on what the governor said and see if there are going to be any notable changes. We present our estimated actuals, but right now our big push as a district with all of our departments and all of our leaders is we are starting to work and get ready for the June budget that we present to the board and the community. We take feedback at a public hearing, and then we come back and we have that approved in the end of June. So in a nutshell, this is what the calendar looks like. This is what our second interim had. And I'm pleased to say 3 main things that I want you to take away from. We're able to maintain our 3% reserve. That is a very good thing. The board is 100% committed to salary increases, and we have built that in across the board. And the staff recommended and the board approved at the board meeting a positive certification for this second interim financial report. That's kudos to all of the staff that's worked very hard on not only cost savings, but making sure that we are calculating everything as precisely as we possibly can. So with that said, that's it for this week. If you've got a question about budgets or something financial, please do go ahead and send that to CBO@mdusd.org, and we'll see you next week.